Instructions to reunite more than 2,300 children separated from adults under the policy are likely to take weeks to draft out and carry out, an administration official told the Wall Street Journal. As NBC News reports, adults who are intercepted entering the country illegally receive something called an A-file number from DHS that designates their legal case. If they are accompanied by their children, the kids receive the same A-file number. If parents are separated from their children, however, the children receive a different A-file number, which can make it more complicated to pair parent and child in the future. After the migrant parents who were separated from their kids have their cases adjudicated, meaning after they are deported, jailed, or released, they can use these A-file numbers to locate their children or arrange communication. Now, that should be simple for them. That's just a portion of the children's crisis at the border. The Pentagon confirmed Thursday that the Department of Health and Human Services had requested they provide space for 20,000 migrant children at military bases in Texas and Arkansas.
So a senior Trump administration official said yesterday that about 500 of the more than 2,300 children separated from their families at the U.S.-Mexico border have been reunited since May. And Health and Human Services Secretary Alex Azar tells the Washington Post this, quote, "We keep in touch with the parents under any circumstances to ensure placement with relatives or if parents are released. But the anecdotal evidence is mounting that that's just not the case." The New Yorker's Jonathan Blitzer reports from a New Mexico facility on 50 mothers who've been separated from their kids. He writes that one mom told him, quote, "Few of them know where their kids are. Mothers are going to be leaving this facility with psychological problems." Blitzer reports none of the agents has explained to the mothers how they can locate their children. The Washington Post has published an account from a public defender who described a hearing with a mother whose child had been taken from her. Quote, "One of my colleagues asked the federal agent on the stand about the whereabouts of my client's child. The Justice Department prosecutor objected to the relevance of the questions. The judge turned on the prosecutor, demanding to know why this was not relevant. At one point, the judge slammed his hand on the desk, sending a pen flying. This type of emotional display is unheard of in federal court. The judge said, I cannot understand this. If someone at the jail takes your wallet, they give you a receipt, they take your kids and you get nothing, not even a slip of paper." Or this report from the state of Maryland, where many children have reportedly been sent with little information. One is 18 months old. Several are too young to speak to their new caregivers or help social workers track down relatives who could take them in. Lawyers are trying to figure out how to put together asylum claims for six-year-olds who don't know why they fled their countries. It is clear this crisis is far from over. To put things in perspective, a map compiled by the Washington Post shows where children are being sent around the U.S., Joe, and if you take a look at this, they're scattered. They come from the Texas border, places as far as Washington State and up here in New York City.
It's unbelievable, and you know, the wretchedness of what Donald Trump has done here. And I must add, those who were supporting Donald Trump blindly, claiming that sending young children to places 2,000 miles away from where their parents are is like sending them to summer camp.
Yeah.
The wretchedness of that mindset, the wretchedness, the depravity. You do wonder what actually has happened to people who speak like that in defense of a president, John Heilman, that deserves no defense, certainly not in this case. And, you know, Donald Trump said during the campaign famously he could shoot somebody in the middle of Fifth Avenue and his supporters would still support him. Perhaps that is the case, perhaps. But apparently he can't push a policy that tears babies from their mother's breasts while they're breastfeeding, that separates 2-year-old children, infants and toddlers, and throws them into what one intel agent told me reminded him of black sites where we put terrorists after 9/11, and not have a fierce political blowback. While we focused on the human dimension of this, let's talk for a second about the political dimension of this. Republicans are scared as hell on Capitol Hill. People inside the Trump administration are scared as hell. I smell the fear inside of there like I did during Katrina. They know something horrible has gone wrong. The question is, John, what will the impact of all of this be politically?
Well, I think it's a little too early to say, partly because of the fact that the story is still unfolding. There's no question, Joe, that the president, obviously, you guys talked about this on the program yesterday, the president obviously never likes to climb down. He rarely has folded in the face of political pressure, has rarely capitulated in quite the way that he did 2 days ago. And the reason that he did was for all the reasons you just said, primarily that he had, I think he was faced with polling data and intuition that correctly asserted that if Republicans were saddled with this policy going forward, there were going to be maybe 100 Republican congressional districts that were put in play. The House is already in jeopardy, likely to turn over to Democrats in the fall, but that the political consequences of this would have turned a likely blue wave into not just, I don't want to use like stupid metaphors like tsunami, but it would have been just a catastrophe politically, not just guaranteeing the Democrats would take back the House, but guaranteeing that they would take it by enormous margins.
Yeah. Mika, you and I have debated for some time about the impact of Donald Trump, the long-term impact of Donald Trump. I've always said, and it's actually what Charles Krauthammer said in his last column, that this president this is a test of our system. And so far, the system has checked his absolute worst instincts, and they are deplorable instincts. And yeah, I used that word, and I'll
deranged.
keep using it. At the same time, deranged. At the same time, it's interesting. Yesterday was the first time, Mika, that you have said, that I've heard you say, watching the news, he's crossed the line. Mm-hmm. He's gone too far. In a way, like you believe that from day one, but you're saying in a way that is going to cost him long term. He screwed up, and he's going to pay for this one.
Oh, no, he will be forever remembered as the president who traumatized little children. That's his brand now. He's the president who purposefully traumatized babies and children, and he traumatized them for his political gain, or to look strong, or to look like Kim Jong-un. I mean, he has built up to this moment, to the point where now he is the president of the United States of America, who took our country on a collision course downhill, tearing at every seam, being the president who abused little children. And you see in this White House a sinking ship. You see every man for himself. You see the Attorney General now lying, trying to backflip on his own lies when he put out this policy. You see the First Lady trying her best to separate herself from this, because she too could have been one of those children, except she doesn't look like them, but she knows this is bad. So she rushes to the border, and who cares what she's wearing? She probably was talking to her husband, but her husband tried to take that and make it a PR twist as well, which is deranged and sick. But aside from the point, you've got his daughter, who is the counselor for the president, who is forever revealed as a complete fake on these issues. There's no turning back from it for Ivanka Trump. You have Mattis sitting next to him and Pompeo sitting next to him, trying so hard to keep it together, even though the president has traumatized small children whose families were seeking asylum. This is not one of those things where maybe or maybe not he's gone too far. He knows he's gone too far. And Donnie Deutsch, you know what this president's thinking. He's pulling back because this is a massive PR failure. And whether Ivanka said, "Daddy, this doesn't look good," or Trump said that Ivanka said, "Daddy, this doesn't look good," that reporting is fascinating. Yeah. You know why? Because that's all they care about, what it looks like. Yeah. It's deranged, it's abusive, it's cruel, it's evil, and the entire world is watching. Yeah. It is now the time that he has gone too far. Question mark. Go.
I want to attach what you just said to the question and try to ask John about politicizing, and I could put an exclamation mark about everything you said, and it was particularly reprehensible when Ivanka said it looks a certain way. What has to happen now, this can no longer be about who Trump is. It has to be about who we are. If we are working towards November, we can no longer say Trump's the bad guy. If you vote for Trump, you're the bad guy. If you vote for Trump, you are ripping children from parents' arms. The mistake that we've made in the past is look at that bad guy over there, look at that bad guy. What the Democrats have to do is make the next election a referendum on not who Trump is, but who you are. And that's the big difference. You can no longer now as a voter, because it's now not about taxes, it's not even about some abstract term of immigration or nationalism. If you vote for Trump, then you, the voter, you, not Donald Trump, are standing at the border like Nazis going, you here, you here. And I think we now have to flip it. And it's a given, the evilness of Donald Trump. But if you vote, you can no longer separate yourself. You can't say, well, he's okay, but. And I think that gymnastics and I think that jujitsu has to happen.
All right, Jonathan Lemire.
Yeah, I mean, this crisis is so overwhelming, and these images are so heartbreaking, and the logistical challenges ahead to try to reunite these children and their families are so staggering that, yes, this does feel like a different moment for this presidency. We will see if this is indeed that defining moment. He got through Charlottesville. He has the ability to, he was, of course, damaged. His moral leadership was irreparably hurt there, but he survived it. This is a president who has the ability to change the subject, who has spawned off one controversy after another. No, that's how this is. The moment feels different here.
You want to know why it's different? Because it's going to be a long time before any of these children are back with their parents. If, Joe, they get back with their parents. There's going to be abuse, there's going to be problems that they can't confront, and they can't stop this waterfall of pain that they have inflicted on small children. They can't clean this up.
Right.
It's a disaster.
Yeah. Well, and following up on what Jonathan Lemire said, and he started talking about it, you've got Charlottesville, where Donald Trump, of course, defended white supremacists with moral equivalency. You've got, even this year, Donald Trump calling Hispanics breeders. Just last week, saying that immigrants coming across the border were, quote, infesting America. And no, he wasn't talking about gang members. He put them as part of the crowd later. In a phrase. You could talk again about him denying any knowledge of David Duke or the Ku Klux Klan. You could go through 2 years where people supporting Donald Trump are not supporting Donald Trump. Cannot say, oh, I'm just supporting him because he's giving him hell in Washington. No, he's been openly racist, just like we said back in December of 2015, openly racist. And if you support him, then you're supporting that, and you are that. It's that simple, and that's what we've come to now. And if you support Donald Trump after this, Yamiche, it's very clear that you can't just say, oh, you know what, the economy's moved on, and I'm just sort of disaffected, and neither side works, and I support Donald Trump. But the last line of my column in the Washington Post, following up on what Donnie Deutsch said, is that so many Republicans still support this depraved man, and his malignant movement could actually be the most damning element of this tragic American tale. And the question remains, after this, I'm not saying people should support Hillary Clinton. I'm very conservative. I'm far more conservative than anybody around this table on immigration. People watching this show would not like how conservative I am on immigration, or how conservative I am on entitlement reform, or how conservative I am on social issues, or how conservative I am on the economy. But Yamiche, this so transcends ideology. I have no idea how anybody could still support this man after what we've seen this week.
Well, this week was really the biggest test of loyalty for hardened Trump supporters who have followed this president and supported him through scandal after scandal after scandal. I just came back from Minnesota and a rally that he had in Duluth, and people were supporting him more than ever. And they're not rare. I talked to so many people who were representative of a Quinnipiac University poll that was released this week that said 55% of Republicans support the policy of separating children. So Republicans as a whole were backing him. or people calling themselves Republicans. And when I was in Minnesota talking to people, I was getting stories from people that said that these children, yes, young children who are now being detained, that they need to be taught a lesson and that they are being taught by their parents to break U.S. laws. And as a result, they deserve to be in these detention facilities. They deserve to be traumatized, essentially, and be away from their parents. And even after the president signed the executive order, when I asked people afterwards, you know, what do you make of the president's policy now? They were saying, well, he's caving into pressure, and that it's really that he really should stick to his guns on this issue because people are, quote unquote, infesting America. A lot of them cast this in, as really defending American culture as something of being white, frankly, of looking at America and saying, we don't need these brown people in our country. And I was in some ways surprised by this, but also in some ways we know that Trump supporters have stuck with him in the long term through all sorts of things, but this was kind of stunning in some ways.
It is stunning, and we have so much more still ahead on Morning Joe. President Trump says the governor of Puerto Rico has, quote, the easiest job in the world. Might have been one of those jokes where he thought he wasn't joking, but you really know that that's actually what he's saying. We kicked off the show by showing you what the president said about Democrats. Wait till you hear his thoughts on Mexico. You're watching Morning Joe. We will be right back.
Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.